What warning signs are you seeing that no one is paying attention to? Story 1. The collapse of public education is coming faster than any of us think. It's kinda already here in the inner cities. Talk to any inner city high school teacher about their kids' reading comprehension. LMAO, spend a day on Reddit and you'll understand how awful reading comprehension has gotten. You know it's bad when the aughts internet starts to feel smarter than today's, because it sure as hell was not smart back then. Man, I miss the internet of 1997-2008-ish. Basically, before Facebook and the rest of the social apps. I think it has more to do with the fact that back then being on the internet required a bit of technical knowledge, and that meant you were probably already more book smart than the average person. Nowadays everything is so streamlined and clean and user-friendly that every schmuck with a phone has access to the internet and can congregate with like-minded individuals, creating a cacophony of stupidity that turns everyone into idiots. Story 2. Teachers are quitting in droves. I'm a music teacher. Just last night I was talking to two of my colleagues who said they're not excited for performances anymore because they spend the whole evening herding cats and putting in a ton of mental and physical labor. And then go home and wonder how many angry parent or admin emails they'll get the next day. These are people who wanted to teach because they're passionate about their subject and want kids to have a great experience with it. It's super sad. My partner was an elementary school music teacher. This was his third semester out of the profession. He works in tech now. I can't describe the difference in mental well-being I've seen. Not to mention the financial stability. He loved music, teaching music more than anyone I know, but it was killing him. Knowing how important teaching is, but also caring about the quality of life my teacher friends get to have, makes it feel so bad when I recommend quitting. But I can't argue with the results. There's no space for people who love what they do in the classroom. I was a teacher, adjunct professor. It was my favorite thing. I absolutely adore my students and had such a great relationship with my students. I have saved emails and messages from some of them after they graduated. They write me to say how they've gotten their first jobs in the industry. Some told me I changed their life and they are so grateful. The pay and treatment was awful. There is a state limit here on how much an adjunct professor at a community college can be paid. $400 per class per pay period, each semester. I was teaching 3 classes per semester and my take-home pay at the end of the month was less than $2,000. Now I have a job where I work about 30% as much, with much smaller responsibilities, mostly from home. I make $70K/year. I miss teaching every day, though. I hope when I'm older I can go back and teach in my spare time. I want to be clear for the laws in my state. The law doesn't specifically limit the $400 number, but the number is calculated as a percentage of total allocated budget that it cannot exceed. It just happens that the budgets for adjuncts are usually not touched or prioritized, and obviously school budgets aren't increasing for government schools, so that's why it's that amount. I'm a teacher who left the US because US children are horribly raised and the school system punishes teachers and not students for bad behaviors. Children are put into bubbles where they're not supposed to experience any negative feelings at any time in their formative years, which makes them grow into incredibly weak and entitled adults. Children need to learn to experience adversity maturely in the safe environment of the school so that they can handle the unavoidable adversity of real life. I get trying not to scar children emotionally, but failing a child for a school year or punishing them for bad behavior and not just giving them a talking to is not going to scar them for life. On top of this, teachers are paid a pittance compared to most other professions. Horrible work conditions, no support or gratitude, low pay, and few career prospects. Story 3. Healthcare is freaking scary. Staff shortages are reducing access to so many things. I have a referral to neurology. I can't get in for 8 months. I hope my problem isn't urgent. My sister died a week before her appointment that was made 2 months prior for the problem she died of. I am so sorry. That's fucked, I'm sorry. Back in 2020, I made an appointment 2 months out for a horrible pain I felt in my lower right hip area. Exactly 3 days before my appointment to get an ultrasound, I was rushed to the ER because I couldn't stop screaming. Turns out I had an ovarian torsion and I had to have the ovary removed during an emergency surgery. At least insurance covered the full cost of the surgery because it was an emergency. Story 4. Lack of well-reported local news. My local news is 85% stuff happening in other states. My local news is a station in another state, so things happening in my state are only news stories if there's absolutely nothing else going on in the major city I live near. Story 5. There's a loneliness epidemic that already has taken root and is getting worse. Romantic and platonic relationships are at an all-time low, and forming new relationships seems as impossible as ever. This is only going to cause more mental health issues and premature health issues. I made a post because I've been struggling with loneliness for years now. It hurts when you're surrounded by people but don't feel included. This is how I used to feel in a relationship. I used to think the worst thing in life was to be alone. It's not, the worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel alone. Robin Williams. I'm now single, live alone and no longer crave validation or love or attention in order to improve my self-worth. I much prefer being alone now. It's so liberating. No more compromise, no more sacrifice. The freedom to get to choose every single day what I want to do, without having to run it by someone else to see if they want to do it, is beyond compare. 100%, and it explains why it's so bad in the US. Home spread out, no third places, people at each other's throats, selfish. Anecdotal, but I moved to a new state a few years ago and my third place was the dog park, saw the same folks all the time and now have a new actual friend group because of going to the dog park daily. Plus, have lots of other people that I'm just dog park friends with. It's wild how much people will talk about / share when they see you often enough, even if you're not close outside of the dog park. Yeah, dog park is a natural social space since the dogs will interact with one another and it strikes up conversation. Plus there's always some awful misbehaving dog for everyone to rally against. LOL. Story 6. The DoD is blaming American veterans for underwhelming enlistment numbers. Apparently, us complaining about how bad it is to be in the military is preventing them from pulling the wool over people's eyes. On that note, please educate yourselves on the rape / sexual assault statistics across all branches of the armed forces and spread the word. I bring up rampant sexual abuse every time a recruiter somehow finds my phone number. It always ends the conversation. I lived in Japan for a few years. I was not military at all. During that time I reached out to an English-speaking mental health organization and was placed with a therapist who was based in Okinawa and specialized in sexual assault trauma. Okinawa is a part of Japan with a lot of military bases. It did not take long for me to put 2 and 2 together. Makes sense why Okinawa was the only place where locals obviously disliked my presence. I mistakenly had just buzzed my head because I was poor and didn't want to spend money on a haircut. A few actually wanted to see my passport for something, so instead I gave them my resident card, which changed their mood quickly. On the card they could see I was just a measly intern for a mainland Japanese company rather than military and had been living there for a year or so. I never blamed them though. Also the only place I was ever carded for alcohol. Story 7. Being in healthcare for almost 30 years, I will say, hands down, that the insurance you choose is actually more important than the doctor you choose. Your insurance carrier will dictate your care way more than your physician will. They decide what tests you get, when you can have them done, if auth is required, whether or not your doctor recommended surgery is truly medically necessary, and when you have to leave the hospital if you're ever admitted. If they believe you no longer meet medical criteria for IP care, you're out, no matter what your doc thinks or wants for you. If only we actually had a choice. Most Americans are stuck with whatever shitty coverage their employer provides. And most of those that aren't in that group have even shittier government options. Yay! Best healthcare system in the world. And then you are afraid to leave your job BC you don't want to lose the healthcare coverage. It's messed up. Story 8. The tiny harbingers of the breakdown of the social contract. Road rage, general lack of courtesy, immediate escalation for the smallest inconvenience. People just don't care as much and it's becoming a social contagion. Why would an individual act in everyone's interest when it seems like one can't always expect the same? Heavy on the immediate escalation of the smallest inconvenience. Zero emotional self-regulation. Like small children. Especially in their cars. I noticed an increase in dangerous drivers, but I convinced myself I was imagining it. Everyone thinks their city has the worst drivers, and since cars were invented, everyone whinges about how reckless other drivers are these days. But the road death toll in my state is nearly double the same time last year. I notice more and more of this every day. The thin veil of civilized behavior is dissolving. Think back to Hurricane Katrina. It took maybe all of 3 days for the system to break down. Granted, the precipitating event was extreme, but now we are seeing the basis of civilized behavior erode on a normal day. Absolutely. No decency for neighbors, no care for others' safety on roads. It's alarming. Story 9. Doesn't really snow here anymore. We used to get at least a few inches 2 or 3 times per winter. It's been over 50 degrees the last 2 weeks. And an honorary mention, seems like there's fewer and fewer bugs around each spring and summer. Used to go outside and there would be tons of bees, butterflies, beetles, and of course, tons of mosquitoes. Now? Barely a fraction of that number. This is mostly the same here, central New York, except any missing bugs have been replaced by some super invasive stink bugs that came over here like a decade ago on a boat. So many stink bugs. They're everywhere. And spotted lantern flies.